Assalamu alaikum everyone, I'm Misha Manahil and it's an honor to welcome you all to the last day of the Black Hole Debates 3.0. Today we are welcomed by our judges Dr. A.H. Nair and Dr. Nazir Mahmood and our participants who will be partaking in the final round for this series. Today, we confront not just a policy dilemma or a geopolitical puzzle, but a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in real time, the Gaza crisis. What began as a decades long conflict over land and identity has now escalated into one of the most brutal genocides recorded in history. Over 37,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, and infrastructure and aid have been deliberately targeted. In response, the world has offered nothing but statements and no solutions. This isn't just a debate about borders or warfare, it's about power, truth, and the human cost of political interest and active terrorism. And so today, as we begin this final session, I urge all you participants, speakers and listeners alike, to move beyond rhetoric and bring moral clarity, legal insight, and the courage into this conversation that even our leaders are not able to put up. Because if we cannot speak the truth here, in a space built for discourse and dissent, then where can we? Thank you. Today, I will start by with the format of the debate. There will be a 2-minute opening statement that will be given by each individual participant. Afterwards, the discourse will begin on the subtopics that have been assigned to the participants. Each participant will be given 2 minutes per rebuttal or argument. After an hour and a half, then again, you will give your 2-minute long closing speeches. You will be judged based on your argumentation, your style, and your content. So please be careful when it comes to your content of speech and how you talk to other panelists. I would like to call the first participant on stage. That would be Hadi Adnan from, that would be Asim Rashid from BMIB. Abdur Rahman from Modern Age School. Tasnima from the Science School. Inshra Amin from Modern Age Aptabad. Abdullah Ibrahim from Roots DHA. And Hadi Adnan. You all will be assigned a number from 1 to 6. You will be referred by those numbers and not your names. If you wish to speak, you may raise your hand and the moderator will give you permission to speak. There will be no crosstalk or no backtalking. If you wish to give an argument, you may raise your hand. Your debate will start shortly. We will begin with number 1 to 6. Number 1.
Am I audible?
You may start.
Firstly, we need to understand the fact that the entirety of the Gaza crisis, it actually did not begin on October 7th. It is something that has been going on for about the past 75 years. Is it still about occupying another land, taking the control of that land back, or is it just the violation, fighting against the violation of basic human rights? What are we seeing in Gaza right now? The UDHR Article 3 guarantees right to life. It guarantees the right to a safe life. However, where is that right? How is that right being given to the people in Gaza? This right is being violated. We need to understand the fact that over 37,000 civilians of Gaza, most of them being women and children, have been collectively punished. How are they punished? They have been punished by not being given adequate free food and water. How much more basic can it go? The ICECSR Article 11 actually guarantees you the right to adequate food and water because that's essential for living, right? But then again, in Gaza, what are we seeing? We're seeing continuous violations. We need to see the fact that in Gaza right now, there are foreign settlers. These people, the people of Gaza, they have the right to fight against these foreign settlers that are affecting their lives under the UNGA Resolution 3742 of 1982. Understand the fact that when these foreign settlers come into your region and when they try to take control over your resources, over your safety, over your security, all of these things are violations of their basic human rights. Then why are the Gazans and the Hamas being blamed and bullied for just taking control of what rightfully belongs to them? Thank you.
Isklis said over the years ago, in war, truth is the first casualty. And today, truth itself buried beneath the rubble of Gaza, beneath the cries of mothers searching for their children, beneath the silence of a world that learned to look away. Distinguished panelists, respected judges, we gather not merely to dissect a political conflict, but to speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Over 40,000 Palestinian lives have been lost, many of them children's, whose dreams have been shattered under falling concrete. The world watches, paralyzed by diplomacy and numbed by normalized suffering. Yes, Hamas's October 7th attack was brutal, uncondemned, and unjustifiable. But does that give license for an unrelenting military campaign that flattens hospitals, schools, and refugee camps? When self-defense becomes indiscriminate destruction, when military force turns into mass discriminants, we must ask, where does justice end and vengeance begins? This debate is not about sides. It is about sorrow. It is about justice. It is about asking ourselves, why do global institutions like UN, ICJ stand by toothless and trembling? Why does international law protect some but betray others? And how can we speak of peace when truth is censored and accountability is optional? We urge you, do not just weigh facts, feel them, because history is not just written by those in power, it is just by the conscience of those who dared to speak in silence when become betrayal.
Is this working? Ladies and gentlemen, if stupidity were a competition, I believe Hamas, Netanyahu, and definitely Mr. Tough Guy Trump would be neck and neck for first place. The question we're to debate at hand is who's accountable for the Gazan crisis. Is it Hamas for the October 7th attack? Is it Israel for their disproportionate retaliation? Or for the first Nakba in 1948? Or is it just good old Trump fueling the fire metaphorically and literally? I mean, the guy single-handedly funded the Israeli mission. Anyhow, this is what I have to say. I condemn both Hamas and Israel. I condemn the hypocrisy of those, especially in the West, who run a party with an anti-war motto whilst funding apartheid and genocide. I believe in resistance, but never when it involves killing innocents. And finally, I believe in accountability, not just for foot soldiers, but for every brain-dead, heartless politician who signs the check, who gives the order, or watches and does absolutely nothing. Hamas, launching brutal attacks on Israeli civilians, abandoned not just the moral high ground, but also any strategic sense. It handed Israel the excuse it needed to unleash destruction, and Israel did just that, attacking with disproportionate force, flattening apartment buildings, and bombing hospitals, completely tearing to shreds the rulebook of international law. And whilst all of this unfolds, where's the institutions we built to prevent it? The UN, absolutely paralyzed because of the veto, the ICC, ignored by all, and the ICJ, declaring genocide prevention orders only to see them disregarded like a terms and conditions page nobody reads. So who's at fault? I think it's almost everyone, with the victims being who never cast a vote, who never fired a rocket or ever ordered an airstrike. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. To ask who's at fault in Gaza without context is to ignore decades of military occupation, displacement, and apartheid. The Gaza crisis is not a question of one tragic moment, but of a long, uneven history. When an occupied population strikes back, the world rushes to judge, but rarely pauses to ask what led to this. Definitely, Hamas's attack was brutal. But when disproportionate retaliation becomes the norm and the civilian death tolls stretch into tens of thousands, which include children and women mostly, we must question where the real imbalance lies and whether the so called moral high ground ever existed in such an asymmetrical conflict. Institutions like UN, ICJ, and Arab League have tried to intervene, but with little effect. The tools exist resolution, legal actions, and sanctions, but power politics trump principle. The ICJ has ruled decisively in some conflict, but its inconsistency, especially with Palestine, chips away its legitimacy. Meanwhile, the global superpowers are continuing to veto ceasefires while arming only one side. If any other nation acted with such impunity, would we not question its legitimacy in international community? The crisis is not just a failure of peace, but a failure of global system to hold all nations equally accountable. Thank you.
Good morning, honorable judges, esteemed speakers, and respected guests. Today we gather not just to dissect a crisis, but to confront a deep moral, legal, and humanitarian failure. The Gaza crisis is not merely a war of rockets and retaliation. It is a human catastrophe, a legal test, and a political reckoning. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a brutal assault on Israeli civilians. Israel's response, as anticipated, was swift and disproportionate. According to UN reports, as early 2024, over 37,000 Palestinians, including 70% of women and children, have been killed. Entire neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals in Gaza lie in ruins. Institutions like International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice have attempted interventions, but their rulings are often symbolic, lacking enforcement. For instance, while the ICJ has ordered Israel to prevent genocide, Israeli military operations have continued raising questions about the court's legitimacy and influence in high-power conflicts. The United Nations, theoretically the guardian of the global peace, have passed numerous non-binding resolutions condemning Israel's action only to see them vetoed, mostly by the United Nations. It is worth noting that since 1972, US has used its UN Security Council veto power more than 45 times to shield Israel, undermining both international consensus and justice. Some voices now ask whether it is time to label the US and Israel as rogue states and even consider expulsion from the UN. While extreme, such arguments reflect mounting global frustration. Former IAEA chief Mohammed El-Baradi said that if international law is only for the weak, it is no law at all. Thank you.
Honorable Chair and distinguished panel, I'd first like to discuss if it was even wise for Hamas to attack Israeli civilians. To start with, Hamas knew Israel's security doctrine, and it is based on deterrence. Deterrence meaning that retaliation will be much larger than the attack. Hamas's attack on October 7, 2023 killed over 1,200 Israelis, as reported by BBC, with over 200 of them 200 extra being taken hostage. It's clearly an unprovoked act of terror which violated the Geneva Convention 4 of 1949, particularly Article 3 and Article 33, which prohibits attacks and hostage taking of civilians. But next, let's understand why Hamas decided to attack in the first place. It's clearly they had the intention to sacrifice Palestinian lives, intentionally to gain propaganda and international sympathy for they prefer their ideological goals over civilian warfare. Next, let's understand what the UN has been doing about this. Well, the UN Security Council's ceasefire did fail due to the US veto, but it was only to protect Israel's legal self-defense rights under UN Charter Article 51, which states that Israel can act with weapons if as a form of self-defense. And the UN has proven to show its sort of hypocrisy, right? When we talk about UNGA's fourth committee and how it consistently passes anti-Israeli resolutions regardless of context, it's pretty clear about what's going on. And as to discuss if calling US or Israel as rogue nations, it's clearly impossible because under the UN Charter Article 6, it requires a Security Council recommendation along, may I complete my sentence, along with a UNGA note which US vetoes.
With that, the opening statements have been concluded. We will now begin with the panel discussion. We will start with the first point. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel. This ended up in the death of 1,200 Israeli civilians. Given Israel's history of military brutality and collective punishment in Gaza, was this a reckless act by Hamas, or was this a sign of bravery, and was this a sign of bravery that the Palestinians showed the Israeli occupation? Number 6.
Firstly, I'd like to clarify the past that Israel has been showing brutality. Let us give you some basic history, right? In August 2005, Israel withdrew all its settlements and military presence from Gaza. But Hamas forcibly took control of Gaza in 2007. Since then, it has used it to attack Israeli civilian areas. And under the UN Security Council Resolution 1515 and Oslo Accords from 1993 and 1995, Palestinian authorities were to prevent terror attacks in their areas and maintain security. And Hamas not only failed, but violated those agreements. And as for Israel's retaliation, it's clearly all under the UN Charter 51. And the so-called blame on Israel is not only unfair, it's wrong, because Hamas only did this for clear propaganda and to get the sympathy of all of these other states, because clearly they've violated a lot of resolutions and a lot of charters already. Thank you.
Firstly, understand the fact that the attack on October 7th was not just a mere attack. It was not just a military occupation or anything. It was a buildup of what has been happening for 75 years. The very UN Charter that was mentioned by this panel earlier actually allows Palestinians to fight for their lives if there is a foreign occupation, if there are foreign settlers in this land. Let's understand what has been happening for the past 75 years in Gaza. They don't have an airport of their own. They're not allowed to have proper passport facilities. If they have to travel outside the country, they have to go through the continuous bullying and harassment of the Israeli police officers, which is just a way to show them that, hey, this is not your land anymore and you're not important enough. Talking about furthermore, if we talk about the United Nations, for instance, Palestine does not really have any formal recognition in the United Nations. It does sit there as an observing member. However, it does not have any voting rights. Why does it not have any voting rights? Because rogue states such as Israel and the United States believe that if Palestine has a voice in the United Nations someday, that would actually lead to a failure in their plan of destroying Gaza and developing projects there. Understand that when attacks like these take place, we cannot just blame organizations like Hamas, which just want to protect their homeland. The homeland that they have been that they have had for the past hundreds of years. However, everything that has been happening after October 7th is just not justified. You cannot blame people when they fight against terror and when they fight against brutality. Thank you.
Okay. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas deployed a surprise attack on Israel. 1,200 people died and over 200 hostages were taken. Now, this did lead to a catastrophic Israeli military response in Gaza, which killed over 50,000 Palestinians and displaced over 2 million. The question is, was this attack wise? From a strategic standpoint, absolutely not. It was reckless and short-sighted. Hamas and we all knew that Israel has a documented pattern of disproportional force and indiscriminate bombing, right? Yeah. Launching an attack on Israeli civilians was guaranteed to provoke Israeli governments and provoke not just military retaliation, but also a humanitarian catastrophe. Sure, Hamas may have believed that this would force the world to finally pay attention to Israel's ways and their injustice, but it's morally incorrect when the cost is literally civilian lives. Our final verdict on this is it wasn't wise at all. But look, no innocent civilian life should be targeted under any circumstances. Hamas lost all moral justification when it attacked the innocent civilians in Israel, but Israel also lost any moral defense when it carpet bombed the entire landscape of Gaza and deployed collective punishment, which violates the Fourth Geneva Convention. See, in war, there is no balancing evils. Okay? One crime absolutely does not excuse or justify another. Condemning both Hamas and Israel isn't a contradiction, is the only morally consistent and correct position. Thank you.
Okay, so I will disagree with the speaker number 5 that he just said that Israel is doing this, Palestine is doing this just for a propaganda and it's just gaining the sympathy. If we talk back in 2021, on May 10, 2021, Israeli extremists entered the Masjid al-Aqsa and fired bullets and grenades on the people there who were praying, and around 20 to 25 people were killed. After that, since then, between the 2021 to 2023, both the countries are firing at each other, and they have built walls, and they are at war. Then in 2023, on October 7, 2023, around 6:30 a.m., Palestine attacked Israel, in which around 12,000 Israelis were killed. After that, in return, Israel attacked Palestinians, and in the before 2024, at the end of the year, around 37 Palestinians were killed. So that's.
Hamas was absolutely aware of the disproportionate response of Israel. It surely led to loss the Palestinians' moral stand. It turned international sympathies against them, not to gain international sympathies. And my question is that, is Hamas' unwise attack would have been either Hamas's own decision, or any power or agency might have instigated them to create justification for this heavy destruction in Palestine? Whatever the reason may be, the same consequences would be understood. But if we talk about who would face the consequences, mostly the children and women, it was of course not a wise decision by Hamas inviting sure destruction and massacre. If we talk about the destruction and debris, the 39 to 50 million tons of rubble have been generated by Israeli airstrikes and ground operations. According to UN, 14 to 15 years needed to clear the debris, even 100 trucks continuously removing it. Removing the debris is estimated cost at least $500 to $600 billion. These constraints are not just logical, but deeply humanitarian and environmental. Gaza's destruction is not just measured in rubble, but in the lives buried beneath it and the futures lost in every shattered homes. Clearing the debris may take years, but restoring the humanity will take global conscience.
I just want to say that what the speaker number 3 said, okay, we can condemn both and not contradict. However, we also have to agree with the fact that Hamas and Israel hold totally different powers. Israel is backed by a superpower, USA, while Hamas is a resistance fighter group. So it's very illogical to say that they both hold the same power. And I also want to add to that, just a day before October 7th attack, USA warned Israel that there was an unusual increase in the military equipment in Hamas. So there comes another question, that what if Israel knew that there would be an attack and they actually want and let this attack happen to use this as a propaganda to gain sympathy from international community? Why is it that I just don't think it makes sense that Hamas would attack and kill civilians, and they think their main purpose was to gain the sympathy of international community. What makes more sense is that Israel allowing the attack to happen, and which would inevitably gain the global community's sympathy. Thank you.
Understand that Hamas does not actually represent the Palestinian authorities. Hamas is a resistance group. When does resistance rise? Resistance rises when the basic rights are violated. Understand that when Hamas actually carries out these attacks on Israel, we need to understand the fact that it's just a resistance group at the end of the day. Some call it a proxy of Iran, some call it just a terrorist organization. But why are we not looking at the fact that when Hamas attacks Israel, they just mean to get their rights back? Rights. And when we talk about Israel, on the other hand, what are they doing for the past 2 years almost? They have been blocking aid. They have not been letting medical or food supplies inside Gaza. It's basically a prison, an open-air prison, where they cannot get access to any resources, where they cannot get access to doctors. But then again, they expect Hamas to just remain calm and poised because, oh wait, you're not allowed to do any resistance. You should just sit in a corner. You should just face whatever Israel is going to give you, because that's your destiny, and Israel is an occupator. Thank you.
I believe that you may have misunderstood what my point was. We agree with you, Speaker 4. If you say that Israel knew that if Hamas attacked, they would retaliate with disproportionate force, if they did know that and they did continue with that disproportionate force, that is exactly why we condemn Hamas's attack, right? Hamas basically went up there and gave them a blank check note which said that, okay, we're gonna attack you and you have every single right to come and attack us back, right? They killed civilians, and now that's exactly the reason why Israel comes up on international forums and says we're bombing apartments, we're bombing families, because we believe Hamas insurgents are lying beneath those buildings trying to launch launch missiles at Israeli civilians, right? Understand that if Hamas continued to gain empathy and sympathy from international forums before attacking innocent civilians, there could have been a solution to the Gazan crisis. But they had to go and attack civilians, and they had to sort of give Israel an excuse to attack them back. If they knew there was going to be disproportionate force, there's going to be disproportionate retaliation, why would they ever attack, right? Furthermore, Speaker 1 says Hamas attacks Israel, kills innocent civilians, but it's a resistant group, right? Do you really think resistance includes killing innocent civilians? If you were to actually be a resistant group, you would attack Israeli officials attack Israeli military buildings, not civilians, not take hostages, right? Thank you.
What we don't understand is why this panel still states Hamas as some sort of self-defense or some sort of way to protect their rights, or the fact that they're just protecting what was actually theirs. Isn't that exactly what Palestine is against to start with? And let's not forget the Hamas charter, which basically calls for the destruction of Israel. And calling it a peace force or calling it a way to defend your rights, or the so-called unfair attacks by the large scale that Israel is at, right? Its whole charter is based off of destroying Israel in 1988, and this UN is still not addressing the way Hamas has embedded its military assets in civilian areas in Palestine. So whether it's a force that Iran has taken over or whatever has taken over, Palestinians are supporting it. They're letting them embed their military assets in hospitals. And then you have the audacity to come and blame Israel for attacking hospitals or so-called so-called innocent civilians. Well, maybe don't embed military assets in such civilian places to start with. And when we talk about the attack that Hamas conducted, right, we're comparing 1,200 Israelis plus the 200 hostages to a mere 30 Palestinians. Isn't that quite atrocious, considering the size of Israel to start with?
In 1967, in 1967, Palestinian Liberation Organization (PLO) was found, and it was so basically their purpose was they were revolutionaries and they wanted to get back their country, but USA and Israel declared them as terrorists. So the same case is here, that now if Hamas is doing the same thing, now they are also considering them as terrorists. In 1992. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin declared PLO as that PLO is not a terrorist organization, and then they in 1993 both the prime ministers got the first Nobel Peace Prize award. So the same case is here, that if Hamas is trying to get their revolutionaries and they want to get back their country, so why people USA and different organizations and communities are saying that they are the terrorist organization?
We also, what the speaker number 5 said, that you condemn Hamas and all that, but why is it that in history you actually supported Hamas? And we have to also keep in mind that Hamas has control over only Gaza. So why is it that you are killing people in the West Bank? And you're saying you respect the international laws and Hamas is breaking them. What about when the ICJ court ruled that Israeli separation wall in West Bank, which was illegal under international law, yet still after 21 years, the wall still stands? And the ruling was ignored by the said law upholders, Israel. So what I'm saying is that, isn't this hypocritical? And also this, what Israel is doing right now in international platform is gaslighting. Unfortunately, due to social media, due to the power of social media and how it was recorded by the media workers when they started the genocide in Gaza, they couldn't uphold that image of victims that they were. The narrative shifted, and for the first time, the whole world started to support Gaza. And right now, what they're doing is trying to shift the blame from one to another. again, I'm saying that I condemn what Hamas did with the Israelis, but we also have to understand that Hamas and it's not an excuse for Israel to start killing 37,000 Palestinians.
When we talk about that who is at fault, whether it is Israel or Hamas, but my question is that what is the fault of these innocent people, these innocent children and women? What is their role? Why their life is buried under the falling concrete? I think the war should remain between the government officials, not between these civilians. Who attacked these civilians is wrong, whether it is Israel or whether it is Hamas. By attacking civilians, it is wrong. I think the unwise attack by Hamas, it is also wrong. And after targeting this as an excuse by Israel to attack more than 40,000 civilians of Hamas, it is not a humanity.
All of us present inside this room today are extremely privileged people. We do not live in a constant risk or fear of survival. We do not wake up thinking, oh, perhaps this is going to be my last day because a foreign occupator is going to end my life. That's not how we live, right? But then again, if you put yourself in the place of a Gazan for a second, you'll understand that they have been living in this constant fear for the past 75 years. Understand that when speaker number 6 suggests that this whole entire Hamas conflict should be taken to the United Nations, things are taken to the United Nations when the body or the organization or the country has a seat in the United Nations. When Palestine or even Hamas as an observer is not given voting rights in the United Nations, how do you expect the United Nations to solve any of these issues? Moving on, as said by speaker number 4, the ICJ ruling that was done about 2 decades back. Understand that the ICJ usually, in cases we have seen in cases such as Bosnia versus Serbia, for instance, the ICJ holds a really important value. However, if we talk about it in the context of Israel and the United States of America, it is merely symbolic. Symbolic because the ICJ is whatever ruling the ICJ comes up with, or even the ICC for that instance, the International Criminal Court, the United States of America and the state of Israel are not going to oblige by it. Then what's the purpose of taking all of this to these international courts when they know that they're not going to be given any justice? Moving on, how are we comparing Hamas, a small resistance group, to Israel, a place that is supported and backed by countries like the United Kingdom, the United States of America? They literally sell off their weapons to them. They contribute so much to the killing of Gazans. How are we going to condemn Israel and Hamas on the same level when Israel is controlled and supported by the world's biggest powers, and when Gaza is permission to complete sentence, and when Gaza is helpless and alone? Thank you.
Okay. So, the classic, the human shields excuse has been deployed by the speaker number 6. They say military operations are run from underneath the apartment buildings, from underneath the hospitals and schools in Gaza. Is that really true? We'd like to give you a statistic. Over 90% over 80% of the people that are killed in quote unquote apartment buildings under which military operations of Hamas are held have been civilians, right? And most of them too were children are already patients in hospitals, right? Understand the fact that you may come up here and say that Hamas is running military operations from underneath civilians' houses, but do you really think that's true? When Israel comes up to international forums and says we're gonna block all humanitarian aid to Gaza, and we're only going to send our own aid, right? And then they send weaponized food trucks, right? They send bombs in food trucks and bodies in food trucks. Do you really think that's valid? Do you really think supporting Israel is... I mean, obviously you shouldn't support Hamas either, but do you think supporting Israel is any better? Thank you.
I also want to add that when the genocide started to happen, the Israelis dropped flyers in north of Gaza, saying to basically evacuate to the south of Gaza so that they are safer. And they didn't even consider people in hospitals, pregnant women, or basically patients. They didn't consider them and gave them such short times that even UN publicly condemned them and said not to do it. However, obviously, as usual, what Israel did was they ignored it. Not only that, but when people moved to south, they started to bomb the Rafah several times. So isn't it hypocritical, and isn't it gaslighting by Israel that they are still saying they're the victims and Hamas has killed 1,200 Israelis, but when they are continuously bombing and killing people? And also what speaker number 6 said previously, that how are you comparing 1,200 Israelis with 30 Palestinians? But it's not 1,200 Israelis with 30 Palestinians, it's 1,200 Israelis with more than 37,000 Palestinians. So what I think is gaslighting, it's hypocritical, and it's double standard from the world to actually believe what Israel is trying to propagate. Thank you.
The fact that this panel came up here has been constantly talking about how Hamas didn't do this for propaganda, Hamas didn't do this for sympathy, yet we stand here, talk about the poor Palestinian lives that have been taken away in hospitals, schools, or whatever, and how we're trying to compare Hamas and Israel. They are so not alike. We're talking about a democratic state, a democratic country, with a terrorist group that has done mass terrorism over Israel. And of course, if it's Israeli lives that are taken away, of course it's not innocent, right? But if any life from Palestine has been taken away, right, we are giving it sympathy. And it's clearly the job that Hamas has already done. And there's a reason why so many huge superpowers are supporting Israel and not some terrorist group, because clearly there is a right and there is a wrong. So going for a neutral stand is obviously not going to fix anything. We need to take care of this terrorist group, and maybe this terrorist group should have thought before attacking poor Israeli lives, and maybe not hiding, or whether if they are or not hiding military assets underneath these Palestinian buildings, right? It's attacking civilians in the first place is going to cause a larger retaliation, especially when Israel's security doctrine states or relies on deterrence.
I'd like to explain why these wars happen in the first place. Let's take India in context. Why did Narendra Modi want a war with Pakistan? Because he wanted to secure another term for the BJP. Why does Netanyahu not want to end the war in Gaza? Because he wants another term for himself. The moment the war ends, Netanyahu will be forced to step out of his seat. Understand that this entire conflict in the pretense of terrorism from Hamas is actually just business for Israel. They want expansion of their territories. Why do they want expansion? Expansion so that Netanyahu would be a leader, a savior of Israeli people, and so that he could rule for as long as he wants. It's not exactly a democracy when you're not willing to step out of your prime minister's seat. Moving on. As suggested by speaker number 6, there are bombs that are underground in Gaza. Are there bombs in hospitals as well? Or are there bombs in ambulances as well? Where people and where women and children, where women and children are taking refuge in. Understand that this is all nothing but a big propaganda from the side of Israel. Israel just wants to show the world its might by taking control over taking control over more and more land, and that's how they will be able to achieve their final goal of a greater Israel. Why are they bombing Lebanon? Why are they bombing Syria? Are all of them harboring terrorism against themselves? Is Israel really the biggest baby that's just crying all day long because, oh, everybody wants to have an issue with them? That's not the case. You can not always play the victim. Sometimes you need to take accountability for your actions. Thank you.
Okay, so it may sound harsh, but Israelis are merciless, brutal, and fanatic people. As Hitler said that I would have killed all the Jews of the world, but I kept some of them because I wanted the world to see how brutal they were. So I would end my stance by saying that there are several nations and countries who stayed silent in the whole Gaza crisis and by killing all the innocent civilians. These countries include United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Australia. A philosopher, Desmond Tutu, said that if you are neutral in the situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. So I would end that don't choose the side of the oppressor. Let us not be the nationalist who without compassion. Let us be global citizens with courage and humanity. Thank you.
We'll move on to discuss the next aspect of this debate, which is the ICJ. The US and EU are infamous for supporting the ICJ when it comes to adversaries like the Russia, Serbia, and other conflicts that are mostly from the East, but rejects it for Israel. Is the ICJ just a tool for Western powers, or can the global South nations such as like South Africa use it effectively to counteract these attacks and this mass genocide that is occurring? Number 6.
Well, as for the ICJ, it clearly lacks jurisdiction as it doesn't adjudicate active conflicts where self-defense is legally justified. Let us give you some examples of where ICJ has practically failed, right? In Bosnia versus Serbia in 2007, ICJ failed to hold Serbia directly accountable for genocide despite the overwhelming amount of evidence, showing that ICJ basically prioritizes political considerations over legal enforcement. Another big example would be Ukraine versus Russia, right? The ICJ just lacks the enforcement power. Sure, it can provide a sort of judgment or a sort of recommendation, but the ICJ on its own is just a table saying words and not really doing any actions, right? The ICJ lacks legitimacy when self-defense against terrorism is criminalized, because that's what Israel is doing. If self-defense is criminalized, right? It's like it's Israel's sovereign right to defend its civilians, again under UN Charter 51. So the ICJ on its own is not really legit, is it?
Firstly, we'd like to reply to speaker number 6. The International Court of Justice does not actually just give recommendations, it is legally binding. Legally binding as seen in the case of Bosnia versus Serbia. In these cases, the ruling of the ICJ actually becomes legally binding. The International Court of Justice has more authority than the almost entirety of the United Nations, because whatever the ICJ passes, that is supposed to be, whether that's an arrest warrant or that's a ruling, that becomes legally effective and legally binding. Moving on, we talk about the International Court of Justice and blame that it does not really have any actual authority. Well, the authority does exist when you are supposed to hold poor countries or weak individuals accountable, individuals from the global south, for instance. But when it comes to the global north, we're not going to hold them accountable because they're too good for it. Accountability should be the same for everybody. There should be standards for accountability. Everybody should be treated equally. Everybody should be treated fairly. But if we move on from the ICJ for a second and talk about the International Criminal Court, There have been reports in the United States that the United States has actually been trying to revoke the American visas of judges of the International Criminal Court. What does that say about your accountability measures? What does that say about your country? Does it say that the United States of America is blatantly refusing accountability because they are a superpower, they can kill whoever they want to kill, and nobody should hold them accountable? Moving on, I'd like to bring attention of this panel to Amal Clooney, a British Lebanese lawyer. Who is a human rights activist and human rights lawyer. She helped ICJ pass the ruling against Israel. And do you know what is happening right now? Despite having valid reasons and visa to live in the United States of America, she is being kicked out by the Trump administration. What does that say about your country? Thank you.
Speaker number 6 and I have something very much in common. We both want the ICJ to have more power. We both want the ICJ to actually carry on the resolutions that it passes, right? When the ICJ declared Srebrenica a genocide, there was a 12-year-long case only for there to be no state-level punishment. When the ICJ ruled that Russia is to stop all military operations in Ukraine, it was ignored by Russia, but US comes along and says that it should not be ignored. But guess what? The ICJ also declares the Gazan crisis a plausible genocide. Where's US now? US does not want to agree to ICJ now, but it did want to agree with ICJ when it came to the Russo-Ukraine war. We believe that the operations in Ukraine should be stopped. Yeah, we agree with you, but we also believe that the operations in Gaza should also be stopped, right? We give US all the power here. We don't have the ICJ does not have any teeth to bite, right? The US carries on every single resolution or operation that it does advise, right? So we would like to invite the United States of America to stop the Gazan crisis, to stop the plausible genocide that was clearly declared by the ICJ. Thank you.
Isn't it cherry picking at its finest when Israel is ready to condemn Russia in Ukraine and Russian war and other conflicts? And isn't it also cherry picking when he said that there were evidence in Serbian war and basically he is against the ruling, but at the same time there are evidence on evidence and evidence that Israel was wrong here in this genocide, and even ICJ has condemned Israel and recognized that they are committing war crimes. So why is it that suddenly they are wrong, ICJ is wrong? And again, I agree with what speaker number 6 and speaker number 3 said, that I do believe that ICJ needs to have more power with more powerful countries or countries that are backed by superpowers. So what we need to do right now is actually, even though ICJ has a legal binding, but we need to back it up with a neutral body that will basically give ICJ more power to carry out its rulings, its decisions, so that countries like Israel cannot actually just say, oh, we are not accepting your decision. Thank you.
When we talk about the South Africa's case accusing of genocide in Israel, who itself is not a Muslim country, and the decision of International Court of Justice on it, we did not witness any implementation, and of course it is all due to US blind support to Israel and for its war crimes, international conflicts like genocides in Myanmar, the Russia-Ukraine conflicts, the Bosnia versus Serbia issue. The role of ICJ is more of warning than deterrence. The ICJ enjoys moral and legal legitimacy, but its practical impact in the Gaza crisis, like in Myanmar or Ukraine, is limited by global politics. In Gaza, as elsewhere, justice through the ICJ remains largely aspirational, not operational.
We actually do agree with number 4 that actually there is a lot of evidence, like a lot, perhaps in 2023 October, or perhaps when Hamas forcibly took over Gaza in 2007. So the ICJ having more jurisdiction, right? It only favors Israel here, and it also goes against everything that we have been discussing in this panel, since if the ICJ does have more power, right, everything that Israel has done was under their UN charter, was under their own rights, and it was stated as self-defense. And sure, the ICJ can be given more power, but as we've seen in Bosnia versus Serbia or Ukraine versus Russia, it clearly prioritizes political consideration over legal enforcement. And as for number 1, discussing the ICC, the International Criminal Court did open an investigation into Israel in 2021, despite lacking jurisdiction, as Israel is not a Roman Statute party. Next, ICC also targets democratic states defending civilians while ignoring dictatorship atrocities like Syria and Sudan. Thank you.
When we talk about the International Court of Justice, we also need to talk about how the International Court of Justice works. There are 2 parties in the ICJ. One party is, for instance, in our case, would be supporting Palestine. The other party would be supporting Israel. In the International Court of Justice, just like the United Nations Security Council, indirectly, vetoes exist. If you have more than 3 P5 countries on your side, then you can basically refuse to oblige with whatever decision or ruling the International Court of Justice comes up with. Let's talk about Israel. Who is going to support them if they're taken to the ICJ again? The French Republic, the United States of America, the United Kingdom. They've got 3 P5 countries, right? If we talk about Palestine, China is most probably going to be a little neutral over here. The Russian Federation might support Palestine, but they're not going to actively do anything because the Russian Federation is also going to look for propaganda in this entire thing. So how do we expect Palestine, with no actual P5 directly supporting them, go to the ICJ and get a decision in their favor? And even if a decision does come, like it did, this year and 20 years back as well, when the Israeli occupation in West Bank was declared illegal, what are they going to do? Since they don't really have any powerful countries in their bloc, they're not really going to have anything favorable said in for them. Moving on, this panel is discussing the fact that there needs to be an increase in the power and jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. It is actually not that easy, since we're all individuals. We do not hold any power to influence the ICJ. We need to understand the fact that the International Court of Justice is fine the way it is. We just need to have more accountability frameworks, accountability measures, so that the next time a country decides to not oblige with ICJ's ruling, we can actually hold them accountable. Thank you.
I've heard enough. Everybody comes up here and criticizes the ICC and the ICJ. Do you know that the ICC and the ICJ work hand in hand? Do you know the fact that the ICC not only convicted Netanyahu and Gallant, but also convicted Hamas leaders like Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Zaif, and Ismail Haniyeh? So how can you come up here and say that the ICC works in bias against Israel when it's literally convicting Hamas leaders, right? Moreover, we'd like to emphasize on Speaker One's point. They've said that the ICJ having more power is not that easy. We understand and we do agree, right? We think that there should be more accountability from other countries, yes, but we also think that there should be an enforcement body for the ICJ and the ICC, as it does lack that, right? We need to figure that out somehow, and that is why we are here right now, right? We want there to be more power, we want there to be more accountability, and we want to hold accountable the war criminals that have fueled this fire, that have absolutely flattened the landscape of Gaza, absolutely demolished every single life of every single man, woman, and child in Gaza, right? When we have poor police officers who work for the civilians in Gaza absolutely disappearing in bombings, not to be seen ever again, leaving their families in poverty. Do you really think that we do you really think that it's valid for Israel to be do you really think that going against Israel is just bias and not just pure facts? Thank you.
When we talk about the legal tools and the international agencies who are continuously failing, not in the recent Israel, Gaza, they are also failing in the other conflict areas. The strongest tool, which is the United Nations Security Council, which can pass binding resolutions under the Chapter 7 of UN Charter, including ceasefire demands, sanctions, and peacekeeping missions. By using these diplomatic platforms just for the political pressure, I think they can also compel Israel and USA for the enforcement of its verdicts. These all is ineffective due to the US vetoed multiple ceasefires resolutions in the favor of Israel's. Some resolutions eventually passed, but too late to stop mass destruction. Despite of all these tools, none of them could play due role. Measures are also symbolic rather than practical. Lack of enforcement mechanism, power of asymmetry, disunity among UN member states, and the funding cuts to UN agencies. These all are the key factors that led to the failures of institutions like United Nations Organization in Gaza failure.
We have mentioned in the panel the UNSC by speaker number 2. The United Nations General Assembly has passed multiple ceasefire resolutions which are non-binding, but those are clearly not been put into effect. So what does the international community's failure to enforce even basic humanitarian access prove about the legitimacy of global governance in general? Speaker 1.
Firstly, understand the fact that the United Nations Security Council, it has passed these resolutions for a ceasefire, for providing access to healthcare and to basic necessities of life. However, none of it actually comes into existence. Sometimes when the United Nations Security Council actually works on things that could possibly hold countries more accountable, that is vetoed by most commonly the United States of America. They do not want anything coming into existence that goes against their brutality in Gaza. Moving on. If we talk about these basic rights that the United Nations actually guarantees humans, all of these have been violated, namely right to life, UDHR, Article number 3, right to safety and security, again, Article 3 of the UDHR, freedom from torture or degrading treatment, again the Article 3 of the UDHR. These are such basic articles that need to be enforced. However, what are we seeing in Gaza is that Israel knows that nobody is going to hold itself accountable. That's why they're doing whatever they please. When we talk about the United Nations and the international community's failure as a whole, we need to understand the fact that it is global superpowers that are behind this failure. If most of the countries in the United Nations, they do not interfere in how the United Nations resolution should actually enforce. They are okay with being obliged by it. However, it is just the big 5 countries that usually have issues. Russia in the context of Ukraine, United States of America in the context of Israel and Hamas. When we look at these specific contexts, we just need to understand the fact that when these countries are going to be held accountable, when they think that they're equal to all countries sitting in the United Nations, that's when we're actually going to come to some change. It's never going to do anything if we create another body. What is that body going to do? It is going to be as useless in this context as the United Nations Security Council, because it won't really have any actual authority. It won't actually end up doing something for the Gazan people and for the genocide that is being committed against them. Thank you.
I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Since October 7th, numerous international bodies have tried to intervene, but all failed to stop the violence or hold Israel or Hamas accountable. Why is that? Because these international bodies are powerless by design, they're paralyzed by politics, and they're ignored by the superpowers, especially the US. We have the United Nations. The UNGA and the UNSC have passed multiple ceasefire resolutions and humanitarian access corridors, but those also failed. Why? Because the US vetoed most UNSC resolutions, and even if the UNGA was able to pass overwhelmingly pro-ceasefire votes, they were non-binding. The UN's humanitarian agencies like UNRWA and WHO, who tried to help as well, all to be bombed and defunded by US, UK and Germany. The ICC, they have requested arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Gallant, as well as many Hamas leaders, right? Charges included war crimes against humanity. But why did it fail? Because the US and Israel are not part of the ICC and don't recognize it. The court has no enforcement mechanism and only convicts. The rest is up to the country. The ICJ declared Israel's occupation of Palestine and bombing of Gaza a genocide, right? Ordered Israel to allow more aid and report its actions. Why did that fail? Because there is no enforcement body. Because Israel ignored the measures. Because US dismissed all of these cases as baseless, right? What does this all tell us? That the institutions we built after World War II to prevent genocide are useless when the genociders aren't our own allies, right? And it's the P5 which runs everything around here, the top of the food chain. So we want to hold them accountable as well. Thank you.
We keep talking about veto, and yes, the United States did veto resolution S-2023, 890, and many others alike, but it was only to protect Israel's legal self-defense rights, right? That we keep mentioning under UN Charter Article 51 again, right? Hamas goes against the Geneva Convention, and yet this panel decides to demean the P5s for vetoing such unnecessary, or not really unnecessary, or such unfair decisions, because it's clearly self-defense. It's not genocide. When we talk about genocide, let's talk about Bosnia versus Serbia, and we see how even that genocide wasn't taken into account, right? We'd like to say that the genocide was actually under Hamas, who ended up attacking Israel, right? Who ended up taking over Gaza illegally, right? So if you do want to take the P5s accountable, right, we'd like to ask how. How exactly are we taking the P5s accountable, right? There's a reason why there are P5s. Thank you.
You mentioned, speaker number 6, that Israel has a right to self-defense. So, according to your statements, you believe that the bombings that have a retaliation of sort by the Israeli government on Hamas is justified. How do you justify the 37,000 Palestinians that have been killed? Because there was no evidence provided by Israel or any sort of forum that those 37,000 individuals were terrorists as well, if we're classifying Hamas as a terrorist organization. How do you defend that?
We define it through our security doctrine of deterrence, firstly. And second of all, when we talk about the civilians that are being killed, we also need to take into account that those were civilian Israelis that were killed, right? And if a group has enough power to kill 1,200 people, and if they aren't terrorists, then maybe the question is to you that how aren't they terrorists?
What I find insanely bizarre is the fact that the Speaker 6 has accused Hamas of carrying out a genocide in Gaza. What is a genocide? Let me define it for you. It is when you kill an entire ethnicity, you are trying to erase an entire ethnicity. Do 1,200 Israelis count for an ethnicity? We're not saying that Hamas killing 1,200 Israelis was right in any sort of way. We do not say that. But 1,200 Israelis being killed is not a genocide. And you cannot hold Hamas as accountable as Israel, because Israel has not tried to commit a genocide, it has committed a genocide. Moving on, we'd like to elaborate on what speaker number 3 said, the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization actually has a lot of power to work in favor of the Gazans and people of Palestine. But understand the fact that this year, under the Trump administration, the United States of America did what it always does. It backed out of the World Health Organization. How do you back out of World Health Organization? And the reason that they provided for backing out from the World Health Organization was the fact that, it's not as efficient, it did not do much for COVID-19, but it was still doing a lot for the Gazan people. Moving on. Let's talk about the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. This is the most ratified document in the entirety of the world. However, the United States of America does not ratify it. There is no propaganda inside this document. Let's talk about the Article 1. It basically provides right to life to all children. The United States of America goes against this. They don't want the right of life to all children. They want a right of life to American children. They want a right of life to Israeli children. But what about the Gazan children? Should they not be guaranteed a right to life? Are their lives not as equal, as important as the Americans or the Israelis? Thank you.
Speaker number 1, you mentioned that the ICJ obviously has a lot of jurisdiction when it comes to arrest warrants and basically giving out orders to the general public, like it has given to Netanyahu. And then you suggested that the UNSC should be should be a space where every nation is considered equal. How do you suggest that happens? And do you even think that's practical, seemingly seeing how the United States, that you have just now mentioned, does not even ratify a document when it comes to the rights of all children? So how do you suggest that the UNSC be created into a body where all nations are held equal, taking into account their size when it comes to land and their size when it comes to population?
I'd like to clarify what I said earlier. We do not propose the creation of another body, or, for instance, the United Nations to have everybody in the same pedestal. We know why the P5 exists, and the P5 existing is fine. That's their right, because they are the superpowers. They have all those authorities and rights to be the P5 and work as P5s. However, what we simply want is that once a resolution is passed, that should be the country should be held accountable. How should they be held accountable? Through possible sanctions, through cutting off all ties with them, diplomatic ties and economic ties. These are the only two things that are diplomatic enough and sensible enough in today's time and age, that through which we can isolate possibly a P5 country that is not willing to oblige by what the ICJ or what the UNSC proposes. Thank you.
That would bring us to the last point that we'll be discussing today, which is on how the United States and Israel should be treated in the United Nations. The United Nations Charter Article 6 allows expulsion of a member if they persistently violate the principles of the Charter, but only through the Security Council, which the US can veto. If a state repeatedly commits war crimes and shields them, and it is not a form of propaganda, it is an open statement that they are making, should they be labeled as rogue actors and be kicked out of the United Nations, which is something that has historically never happened before? Number 6.
Yes, under the UN Charter Article 6, yes, it does require the United Security Council, but to correct it, But to correct the statement made earlier, it requires the Security Council recommendation along with a UNGA vote, yes. And yes, the US vetoes this and makes it impossible for both USA or Israel to be kicked out. But expelling Israel eliminates any diplomatic or humanitarian coordination, right? Especially when Israel contributes significantly to global humanitarian efforts, such as in disaster reliefs, whether it was in Turkey in 2023, Nepal in 2015. Let's not forget the agricultural technology that Israel is providing with the African Union partnership. Let's not forget the medical aid, the field hospitals in conflict zones. Expulsion is clearly extremism, and second of all, it's impossible.
What I believe should be the approach is that even though expelling Israel and USA can be a good thing for some, but I don't think it would be feasible. What would be a better approach though? A better approach would be actually isolating these countries, especially USA and Israel, and putting sanctions on them, just like we did on Iran, we did on North Korea. We can do the same on these countries while allowing them to be part of UN and part of the global community, because the problem is not that they is not them being not being the part of a global community, is that they are not held accountable for their actions. They're pardoned from crimes that usually they hold other nations accountable. What we need to focus on is the legitimacy of global community and the accountability it holds of nations that have significantly more power than others. Thank you.
I think that expelling a powerful nation like US and a regional power nation like Israel would destabilize global diplomacy and fragment the United Nations. If we talk about the UN fundings, the United States contribute approximately 22% of the United Nations regular budget and 25% of the peacekeeping budget. So if we expel United States of America from the UN Security Council, or we can just call them rogue actors, they will cut off their aids and budgets that they are providing to the UN fundings. And secondly, the UN has never ever expelled any member under the Article 6. Even if we talk about the South Africa, and it was South Africa, it was never allowed to. It was allowed to remain a member despite of its global condemnation.
As you mentioned, the Article 6 of UN Charters, which allows the expulsion of any member country from serious violation of war crimes, human rights, or UN Code of Conduct. But it is conditioned with the UN resolutions, and which means, but any serious, and similarly, UN has no such legal status for declaring any member as raw actor. So I think Israel also feels safe as in UN, and it plays havoc with the innocent Palestinian lives. But instead of considering them rogue actors and their expulsion from the UN, we may find a better path. We may need to reform the UN structure, particularly in veto power and in the Security Council, and strengthen accountability mechanism that apply to all states equally, not just the weak. If we say in the short, yes, they can be condemned. No, they can't be expelled. And doing so might hurt more than help.
The UN Charter Article 6 states that a member of the United Nations which has persistently violated the principles contained in the present charter may be expelled from the organization by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. The loophole into this is that it needs a SC resolution to pass for expulsion. However, US is going to veto that. Obviously, we know, right? What else can we do? Yeah, we can label them a rogue actor, a rogue state, or a rogue actor. Yeah, so why do we do that? A rogue actor is basically means that the country has repeatedly violated international laws and blocked aid. How does Israel fit into this? By bombing children. Easy. How do US fit into this? US has blocked every single resolution that stopped Israel bombing children. And what else? Don't forget that the US shielded war criminals when they sanctioned ICC judges demanding an interrogation of US troops in Afghanistan before they were outed for their war crimes. Furthermore, let's suggest what we can do, right? When we label them as rogue actors, we can push all the other countries who are against them to actually defame them, right? We can cut ties with them. We can label them as a innately bad state, right? Who's promoting war crimes, who's promoting genocide, right? What does that do for the country? Obviously, when you're defamed, you're not going to have the same power that you held before, right? When you're defamed, you're not going to have the same economy. You're not going to have the same regimes, right? Your own civilians, your own population might turn against you, right? That's what we're trying to go for here, right? We're trying to tell the United States of America, we're trying to tell Israel that if you keep messing with us, we're going to turn everybody, including your own population, against you. Thank you.
The Article 6 sounds great in theory, but is actually very impractical in reality because you cannot exactly kick out the United States of America or Israel from the United Nations Security Council because that will just get vetoed upon. What we could do, however, is that in the United Nations, for instance, there are two types of members. There's a permanent member and there's an observer member. The observer member does not exactly have voting rights. When they don't have voting rights, they cannot really contribute to if something is going to hold others accountable or not. We could possibly make the United States of America or the State of Israel an observer member for the time being that they do not fix what they have done, for the time that they do not pay reparations, for the time that they do not work on improving the lives of the Gazans, the lives that they have destroyed through the genocide. We need to understand the fact that it would be a very symbolic move to make these observer members, since then the concept of veto won't exist for these countries in context. And another thing that we could possibly do is that we could label them as rogue actors. Who are rogue actors? Rogue state actors are those who do not hold who go against the ICJ decisions and the international law decisions. If they are going international, if they're going against all the decisions of the ICJ and if they're going against all international laws, they could be labeled as rogue actors. And when they are labeled as rogue actors, we could convince other countries, not force them, but convince other countries to possibly isolate them diplomatically and economically and socially as well. When you're not going to have any economic ties with these countries, they're going to be forced eventually to end up fixing what they have done. We cannot kick the United States of America because it is actually one of the biggest funders of the United Nations. It would not make much sense. However, making them a possible observer could do a lot for the people. Thank you.
With that, we will now be moving to the closing statements. I would advise all panelists to take into account every point that you have discussed today. Make sure to not leave out any specifications. You may begin. We'll begin with speaker number 1.
We'd like to clarify and solidify our stance by firstly saying that everything that Hamas did, not that killing 1,200 people was justified, however, protecting their homeland and going against the oppression that they have been subjected to for the past 75 years was actually fine. Moving on, we would like to reaffirm over the fact that the International Court of Justice, I'm so sorry, the International Court of Justice. We would like to reaffirm the failure of the International Court of Justice to uphold these war criminals and and rogue states accountable. We'd like for the International Court of Justice to actually remove remove the concept of having stronger countries in their bloc. Once that concept would be ended, and all countries would be treated as an equal in the International Court of Justice, and when all of these countries would have, and when the ICJ would have stronger accountability mechanisms which would force these countries to uphold the ruling of the ICJ. Moving on, we'd like for the United Nations Security Council to we'd like to basically propose to the United Nations Security Council to make the United States of America and the State of Israel a possible state observer state, an observer state that would not have any voting rights, so that they're not able to veto any decisions that come into existence. Moving on, we'd like to use judicial precedents in this case, cases such as the case in Serbia versus Bosnia, because the ruling of these cases is very important. The ruling went against the oppressor. The ruling went against the country which was committing a genocide. There could be possible debates on how that ruling was actually carried out, but in the end, the main legal precedent of that the oppressor should be held accountable, the oppressor should have accountability, that should be taken into context for future context and future references related to Israel and Palestine and other possible conflicts. Thank you.
In summary, we can say that the Gaza crisis has let bare the painful fragility of international justice and diplomacy. The Hamas's attack on civilians undoubtedly compromised the moral ground long held by the Palestinian cause. But Israel's relentless, disproportionate response has turned a tragedy into a humanitarian nightmare. Institutions like United Nations, ICJ, and ICC have tried to intervene, but their words are often drowned by bombs and blocked by politics. The ICJ may carry moral weights, but its rulings, like in Myanmar, Ukraine, and now in Gaza, are too often ignored, leaving victims unheard and justice delayed. The United Nations hold powerful tools, yet they remain paralyzed by division and silence from those who could act. Calls to expel these nations like the US or Israel's reflect global frustration, but such moves, though emotionally compelling, risk isolating and diplomacy when we need it most. In the end, if we continue to apply international laws selectively, we are just not failing Gaza. We are failing the very idea of humanity.
We'd like to start our speech by reminding everybody here that over 50,000 Gazans were killed in Gaza and over 1,200 Israeli civilians were killed in Israel, right? I mourn equally for both. Let's take Noor for an example. Noor, a police officer dedicated to keeping civilians safe, vanished during Israel's bombing of Khan Yunis. His family is still wondering what happened to him, right? Now, what does this all say? This says that I mourn equally for both. We condemn Israel, we condemn Hamas, and we condemn the USA having vetoed every single resolution that has been presented in the UNSC, right? We would like to give the ICJ and the ICC an enforcement body, so that convicts and resolutions passed by the ICJ and the ICC can actually be put into effect, right? So we can actually hold accountable these war criminals, so we can actually hold accountable Netanyahu, Trump, and Hamas leaders, right? We would like to also invite the UNSC to suggest to the UNSC to make US not exactly an observer state, but a non-veto state. But as for Israel, we definitely say make them an observer state, because it's absolutely discriminatory that Israel comes to the United Nations Security Council and debates on issues, whereas we don't have Hamas, their exact equal counterpart in the United Security Council. Thank you.
And then I just want to say that Palestinians were there first. It is their land, it is their homeland, and they were kicked off unjustly from their own homes, from their own towns. What I suggested firstly was that the failure is systematic. These institutes lack not only political will but also real power, especially when accused are backed by superpowers. So, what I firstly suggested was having a body of enforcers, just as speaker number 3 said, because this would ensure that countries like Israel, that are backed by superpowers, can actually be held accountable for their war crimes. And also, I just want to say that this narrative that what the speaker number 6 said in their previous speeches, that how can we not say that Hamas is a terrorist group when they have killed 1200 Israelis. But isn't this like hypocritical statement when they have also killed 37,000 Palestinians at the same time? So what does that make Israel, if Hamas is a terrorist group for killing 1200 Israelis? Lastly, I just want to say, everybody here, I'm condemning both Hamas, even though they have the right to protect their homeland, but still killing innocent people is not the way. However, at the same time, both powers, Hamas and Israelis, are not on the same level, especially since Israel is backed by superpowers. Thank you.
Honorable judges, esteemed experts, and fellow panelists. As we conclude today's discussion, one truth stands above all. The Gaza crisis is not just a geopolitical conflict. It is a profound human tragedy and a legal failure on global scale. Over 38,000 Palestinians have died in less than a year, but Israel, in the name of self-defense, have targeted hospitals, refugee camps, and air convoys, while Hamas's initial attack on Israeli civilians set off a chain of suffering that continues till this day. As of June 2025, the death of approximately 60,000 innocent Palestinians, including 17,000 children, have been recorded. Malcolm X said that we are living in a world where justice depends not on the law, but on who we are. The International Court of Justice and the United Nations has been reduced to bystanders, unable to implement even the most basic protection guaranteed by the international humanitarian law. So we must ask that if in the institutions created to uphold justice cannot act, then who will? If nations like the US can block actions with a single veto, is a global justice real or merely reversed by the powerless? The statistics are horrifying. The quote echo our collective failure, but the heart of matter remains. Our shared humanity is being buried under the rubble of inaction. This discussion isn't about policies. It is about people. It is not about statics. It is about stories. It is not about borders. It is about basic human dignity. At its core, this conversation is about our shared humanity. Thank you.
Today we were all seated because we clearly all don't stand hypocrisy. But the fact that some panelists here, they come and talk about how Palestine or like the entire area is our land, isn't that quite literally what they're all against in the first place, calling Israelis Zionists and names like that, saying that it's not really your land, but yet coming here and saying it's our land. Looking at this panel today, we are disappointed, but not really surprised, because that's exactly what Hamas had planned. Hamas knew exactly the amount of retaliation, exactly how many Palestinians would have been killed, and yet they chose to sacrifice those Palestinian lives for their own propaganda, for their own benefit, right? They knew exactly what Israel's security doctrine was, right? And the immense amount of power that it holds. And we talk about giving more powers and more power to these laws, and like just in general we've talked a lot about laws today, right? Let's not forget that Hamas or like Palestine, they broke the Geneva Convention, right? Wouldn't that put them in the bad here? And even if we talk about laws, Israel has not done anything against their anything against laws. Any action that Israel has taken place falls under the UN Charter 51, which we kept repeating, right? Everything falls underneath it. So whether it's 37,000, 50,000, or 100,000, retaliation was supposed to be much bigger than the attack that Hamas caused. But Hamas did cause it. Hamas will be taken under under consideration when we talk about laws, and making absurd decisions like taking USA as an observer is not just absurd, it's literally impossible considering the amount of power. And we can't just take away a country's power of veto, or like may I complete the sentence, or say that it's not a superpower, because it is.
With that, our debate has been concluded. I thank you all for speakers for speaking in depth with such, putting it so eloquently on this topic. There were different perspectives, obviously, in this panel. The Gaza crisis will remain a reminder of injustice and hypocrisy of the global politics. Your debate has been concluded. You may go back to your seats. The results will be announced shortly, and then you may leave. Thank you.
Israelis names like Zionists, but they call themselves Zionists.